I'm glad you made it for the last 45 minutes. We've been getting frantic texts from people like speakers, Cynthia and Matt just got here about a minute ago saying I left at 4 o'clock in the morning and I just arrived. And we're also getting text messages from people that want to be in the audience. Their suggestion is we all get in our cars and go to 405 and just meet there. The radio is reporting that this is partly due to the motorcade that Hillary Clinton landed at LAX, and that motorcade is screwing up traffic. So we have no idea if she can run a country, but we do know she can shut down a major city. So things are pretty much moving in the right direction. So we'll have some people trickle in. I'm Gary Hare with Fielding Graduate University, and I'm really pleased this morning not only to bring together this panel, but to bring together this topic. So we want to look at a couple things. And we were pretty direct, I guess, in the way the panel was titled. Presence and reality. So presence, we all know about presence. We all know that you have to have presence in order to engage people in story. We all know that presence is the thing that moves people to action. We all know that it's the kind of thing that pushes public and social advocacy. We all know that it's critical to those things that we consider entertainment classics. But where does it fit when we start talking about immersive media? And we have some folks here today that not only are concerned about it, but are trying to explore ways that presence can be measured, if at all. Also, Cynthia will be dealing with the whole idea of immersive media, particularly VR, and its ability to trigger empathy. Now, the reality part gets interesting because we've got a reality test toward the end this morning. Barry, and I happen to agree with this, is going to address the idea that there's more to consumer adoption than really cool technology. So what's there? What's missing? What might drive this audience? 2 weeks ago I was at a little thing in Silicon Valley, and the projections were that VR would become ubiquitous in the consumer market in 3 years, except for one guy thought it might be 5 years, and 3 or 4 other people thought it might be 8 or 10 years, and 2 other people thought, it might not happen. So how do we get some notion as to how we move these things forward? To help us today take a look at all of this, please join me in welcoming Cynthia Lieberman from Lieberman Communications. She will be our first speaker. And to be followed by Matt Price. Matt's the Global Director of Nielsen Consumer Neuroscience. Matt's down at the other end here. Jimmy Giliberti, Director of Business Development at WorldViz. Matt and I visited WorldViz last January, I believe, and for the first time, I not only saw but also experienced the notion of presence in a VR environment. It's pretty darn fascinating. And some of you know Barry Sandru. Barry's been involved in so many different types of technologies. I don't have enough time this morning to go through all of them, but has a really interesting point of view. And I tell the doctoral students at Fielding in our program, if you're going to follow blogs, I got 2 of them for you. One of them is Barry's. So without further ado, let me introduce Cynthia Lieberman. Plenty of time at the end, by the way, for questions and answers and all that, so we'll try to engage you and then discuss as best we can.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks to Gary Rutledge and many people here, including Dr. Pamela Rutledge. I'm here, I got a master's through Fielding University in media psychology and social change several years ago, before the iPhone, back in the day. And as a result of that, I have 25 years of experience in advertising, promotion, and publicity. I've worked for every studio but Disney, not on purpose. I've just been doing this a long time. And I got interested in media psychology and in the program because I wanted to take these skills, which are weak in philanthropy, and try to do something positive with them. My last full-time position was at Sony, and I left there, and now I have my own business, and I'm a content marketer, media, publicity. I also have a side business called cyberwise.org, No Grown Up Left Behind, and it's about teaching adults and parents and teachers behaviors behind the tools so that they can raise positive digital citizens. So before I get started, my glasses on. I want to ask you to do one thing, and that is write it down would be great, and if not writing it down, think about what you would do if you knew you could not fail when it comes to something that you care about, something that where you could do social good and there was nothing at all, not tech, not money, not location, not, trying to get this to open. Can you help me with that, Matt?
Just go down to the bottom.
On the bottom? Okay. I'm a PC person. I'll have him just open it up for me. What would you do if you knew that you could not fail and you could do something positive? And I'd just like you to sort of write that down and take a mental note. And I'll explain why at the end of the presentation. I'm a storyteller. When I got into media psychology and got into my graduate degree and all my esteemed higher ed folks, I realized that I'm really a translator. I'm not a curator of aggregated content. I'm a translator. I take things and translate them into ways that people can assimilate and use them in their everyday life. And there are a lot of concerns about the potential negatives of using VR, virtual reality, and all these new technologies that are evolving. But, you know, call me Parsivus, if you know who that is, or Luke Skywalker. But I believe that in humanity, I have faith in humanity, and that good always will prevail in the end. But it's our responsibility as content, who is a content creator here? Anybody? Awesome. Well, we're all content creators. Who's done a selfie, right? But it's our responsibility and it's our duty to harness. We have an opportunity with this new landscape to do something great with what we're doing, and it's our responsibility to use it for social good. So I'm not going to focus on what can't happen. My esteemed colleagues here on the panel can give you a lot of research, but what I would like to do is introduce ways that you can use virtual reality to create positive social change. And so I'm going to open up with a clip, which I have to now open on this. Hold on.
We've got to get you a Mac.
I need a Mac. I do. I need to switch. But, you know, I started as a suit, and suits use PCs. So, thank you. Sorry. This is a clip of a London chap who had an opportunity, let me see what that is, hold on. Who watched, how does it feel? That one right there. Who experienced virtual reality for the first time and was asked for his reaction. Let's start it over and turn it up. He had just experienced I think he was in like a aquarium or something and swam with dolphins, or a virtual reality simulation. Thank you. Here we go. Thanks to traffic. There we go. Okay.
Watch the volume on the...
Else of this world, looking all around me, amazing. I loved it. It's really nice, actually. It's really
What
good.
surprised you the most?
I felt like you can look up, down, 350, 360 degrees around, and there's always something there. That's amazing. Looking up, looking down, looking to the right, looking to the left. It was amazing. So good.
Do you think this kind of technology might make people happier in terms of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes? Like maybe even, for example, understanding what it's like to be a whale when people are hunting you.
110%. It's just that kind of virtual reality. Reminds me of that song, but it's just amazing just to like see like creatures going around you and wave your head around.
Do you think it could generate empathy? For example, people who are in government and they're making policy changes, and if they can be in the shoes of, say, somebody who's on a very low income in a deprived neighborhood, do you think it might help generate
100%.
empathy for others?
And even better, like to homelessness as well. In London, it's just ridiculous. So, you know, imagine you being a homeless person for a whole week or a whole day. Just that experience would be so cool. Because you're in there, like you're in the ocean, see these whales going past you. That's so cool. That's really good. So I think that should, social enterprise, social action, I think that would actually do stuff for the politicians. That'd be really good.
Great, thank you.
So he was asked, after he just experienced being entertained, do you think that you could use change with this, using this type of technology? And even though he's got his accent, I think you get the idea that the key here is, how did he feel about this experience? What was the emotional connection? Immersion in virtual reality is one of the greatest, most powerful things that we have. It's different. You don't have the disconnect. You're actually experiencing it like in ways we never have before. And so there is, again, a responsibility that comes with it. And there's a lot of psychology research being done, but it's very infantile. In some ways, artificial intelligence is moving much faster than our emotional intelligence. We've spent 100 years studying the human psyche, and now we probably have who knows how long to really find out what this is going to have in neuroscience, as well as psychological and sociological impact. But in the meantime, why don't we harness this power and create greater empathy and understanding? To heal, to improve the human condition, to bond, and to enhance our way of life. So rather than impose all this data, as I said before, I'm just going to go through and talk through a few examples of different ways that VR is being used for social change. This human connection is certainly the first and most relevant thing, because it's always what's in it for me, what does it mean for me? And in this instance, there was a woman whose husband was working in Australia, and I believe she was in the United States, and she was about to give birth, and he could not get back to witness the birth, and they were able to somehow connect through virtual reality, and he was actually able to see his child born. And what a amazing is, you know, when you talk about empathy, empathy is more than, oh, I feel for you, I feel sorry for you, or whatever. It's also being able to experience a moment that you can't buy back. You can't just go to another graduation or buy another birth. And so this is just one way that you can think about using connectivity and the 360 immersion. And this one, behavioral, this was a project where this woman was in a situation, presented with a situation where a person had a diabetic attack on the street, a homeless person in LA, and she was able to go and react to it and do something about it and experience what you might do. I mean, you don't really know till you're in it, right, when you have some kind of a crisis. But it allows understanding. This can be used in a lot of ways. This happened to be a homeless person, and you might just look or watch or be a bystander, but you don't have to be. You can be an upstander. It can be used for training for emergency technicians, for teenagers, for any of us. It helps us experience and feel empathy for what the situation is and not be afraid to stand up and do something about it. Behavioral. This is what an experiment. These guys put together a scene where a girl gets very drunk at a party, and at first it's really entertaining and kind of funny, and then they all decide to physically take advantage of her. And in the virtual scenario, you have an option to interfere or to at least experience what that would be like. So let's say that you have college students or whatever, adults, who have had a situation where they committed this sort of a crime. It's a way to help rehabilitate, perhaps, and or prevent, and just raise awareness of how vulnerable the human psyche is and how these situations can, and think about from a more immersive point of view how you would manage the situation. Maybe you would want to show it to your kids if you felt that you had an issue. You don't have to tell the world if you don't want to, but it's behavioral, experimenting and explaining. Mental health. There's a lot of work being done. I don't know if any of you saw Steve Rizzo's presentation yesterday on PTSD, but there's a lot of work that's already being explored. He's at USC, and there are other facilities out there. A lot of times veterans or anyone who's had a traumatic experience, they are frozen. It's fight or flight. They can't remember what they're doing. And so they are able to to experience it again. Same thing with schizophrenia. There's a VR out there where you can try your try out what it's like to be schizophrenic in an elevator. You get to experience it. Depression, in this instance, the person who is depressed tries to calm a little girl down, and then they take that voiceover and have her reverse and sit in the chair, and her voice is played over her, so she's really soothing herself. News, just a few days ago, Kenya burned elephant ivory for $105 million worth of ivory to try to get the poachers from stopping doing it. They took the business away. And this was done in the news through the New York Times Google Cardboard. There is also civic engagement. This is a very famous, the Ferguson case done by Nani Pena, where if you show police officers, show people what actually happened, you use actual footage and voice, you can experience and maybe make a different choice and not just stand there and watch the police beat someone up or whatever. You feel empowered to do something. Global issues. This is Chris Milk, very famous, using the UN, using Syria. Footage of a girl who is in an orphanage, showed it to, there are now 3 films that have been done to show people so that they can make a difference in what's happening, understand what's really happening. And internally, it increased 1 in 6 from 1 in 6 to 1 in 12. So it has really made a difference. It's a big movement and very powerful. The Red Cross is doing this also. You can also, there's environmental issues, natural disasters, an earthquake in Nepal. You know, you get donor fatigue with all this disaster. If you can get that out to people. Illnesses, Excedrin just had a migraine commercial about trying to help people understand what it's like to get a migraine. So coming soon to a theater near you is a film about Anne Frank that is really, you know, is that something that you don't want to be so upset you can't do anything and be frozen, but these are things you also have to consider. So those are just a few of the ways that you can think about creating content that motivates positive social change and helps society be a better place. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you.
That's really good. Anybody else want some water? Maybe you. Reality is perception, and perception is not always what you think it is. Good morning, everybody. I'm Matt Price. I'm with Fielding, and I'm also the global director, as Gary said, of Nielsen Consumer Neuroscience. And I just want to show you really quick. First of all, I'm honored to be able to speak on such a holy of nerd holiday, so may the 4th be with you. And for how many people in here have experienced presence before? In a VR experience? 1, 2, 3? All right, for those of you who haven't, this is sort of what it feels like. All right? We all kind of become primates and freak out the first time you experience presence. So I'm going to go through a really quick primer here today, just on reality and presence to set the stage. And we'll just cover 5 things really quickly and move on from there. And feel free to follow me on Twitter if you want to have any other additional questions or speak to me after the fact. So we're going to start off with reality. Philip K. Dick, famous science fiction author, I'm sure many of you are aware of. He said, reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. So if you don't know who Philip K. Dick is, he's famous, most widely known, a lot of his stories were turned into Hollywood feature films such as Blade Runner, Minority Report, and A Scanner Darkly, to name a few. And towards the end of his life, in the late 70s, he was very open about his drug usage. And he wrote some books on philosophy and metaphysics, including one called The Exegesis, where he kind of explores this idea of reality and what he thinks reality is. And to him, reality is what's inside of you and the embodiment of it, and the outside world isn't necessarily reality. So the difference between your own perception and the outside world's perception are 2 very different things. So very interesting, man, if you ever want to read anything about it on the case of reality. But to get from reality to presence, we'll do a quick transition here. to Einstein, and many of you might have seen this quote before. It's misattributed to Einstein. It's actually kind of a takeoff of something that he said in a eulogy letter that he sent to the widow of Michel Bezos, who was a close friend of his. So reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. What he was actually talking about was when Michel Bezos passed away, he was trying to comfort the widow by saying what we perceive as reality, we're actually just a large conglomeration of cells and atoms. And we are all the things that we perceive as real. So him passing on wasn't so much life to death as it was a transfer of energy. So in the world of physics, that was important to him to kind of impart that. But I think what was taken from it, a German newspaper author who picked up on the letter and kind of translated it and simplified it, came up with this idea from the best research I was able to find. But I think it's very apropos. So when you're talking about the concept of presence, what exactly is presence? So here's a picture of Albert Einstein and Michel Bezos. ISPR, which is the International Society of Presence Researchers, Matthew Lombard, who's the kind of founder of ISPR, they got together back around 2002 and they defined presence simply as the perceptual illusion of non-mediation. So if you think about it, most of the things that we engage with in media in our day-to-day lives, it's all a matter of narrative, but oftentimes there's some type of technology that's mediating it. So right now, a laptop is putting this up on the screen for you, along with a projector. We spend a lot of our times engulfed in our laptops, our tablets, our mobile phones, watching TV. But presence can also refer to anything else. So if you go to the theater and you're watching a play and you get sucked into that, that's a sense of presence. It's when the stage and the people around you, the audience, kind of disappears. And it's just you and the narrative. Same thing can be said with reading a really good book, or if you've ever sat down and listened to music for hours on end and the day kind of melted away and you completely forgot what was going on because you were into the narrative of the music. That's all presence. Presence is very much a popular marketing term in the world of VR, and oftentimes it's misused. It tends to be interchanged oftentimes with things like immersion, which is okay, but really immersion is the physiological reaction the body has to an experience. Presence, therefore, would be the measure of that. So, speaking of the measures, what can we measure for presence? This is kind of the basis of what I'm doing for my dissertation work. Well, I'll go over a couple of things that are available to us now, and I will tell you right now, there aren't a lot of companies out there that are doing measurement in VR or AR. There are some that are doing pieces of it. There's some really good survey researches I'll bring up here in a second. But for the most part, there's definitely not a uniform way of measuring presence or an immersive experience. But these are some of the different ways you can potentially measure it. The first and probably most robust, but also typically the most expensive, is neurological. So this would involve EEG or even potentially fMRI, although it's really difficult to do with a head-mounted display. You can't really put on a head-mounted display inside of an fMRI machine. So EEG, along with eye tracking, would allow you to get to some of the neurological basis for emotional engagement. Is there a way we can turn the lights down a little bit so we can see the slides better? Maybe over there on that wall. Thank you. So I'll just, as an aside, again, full disclosure, I work for Nielsen Consumer Neuroscience. This is something that we've done for quite a while. Neurological research applied to consumer market research. So on our day-to-day basis, we test everything from advertisement research to print advertising, radio. Basically anything a consumer can watch or buy falls into the category of what we do for consumer neuroscience research. And we're actively looking at ways that we could potentially apply this to VR, AR, and other emergent platforms. And I apologize for the dark slides. We'll see if we can get through this, and I'll read it to you as much as possible. Thanks. Physiological measurements are going to be the next one. This is going to involve biometric, galvanic skin response, heart rate monitoring, these type of things. These are pretty widely available, and you can calculate them in time based on the experience. And then, of course, psychological. This is where your standard research, survey research is going to come in. This is going to be self-report, interviews, focus groups, that sort of thing. And these can be very effective as long as it's done in a methodical way, right? So exit interviews and just asking people what they feel. Most people especially in this early generation, this is what they're going to say. They're going to say, wow. But you can go through some survey research and actually get pretty good findings, and I'm going to argue that for anything that you do in VR or AR, it's incredibly important to measure what you do. And I'll come to this in the last slide, but do not spend your time creating and spending money on content production that you test and go, this is kind of cool, and then throw it out there for the audience to try out, because the last thing you want to do is damage your brand, and I'll get to that here at the end. So currently, in the area of presence research, there are basically 5 different types of survey research that you can have access to, and luckily all of these are at no cost. They're in the academic literature. So the Slater-Uso-Steed, or the SUS presence questionnaire, was kind of the first one that came around. It was the first to formally organize presence questions in a way that could be measured quantitatively. The presence questionnaire, or the PQ questionnaire, it's up to version 3.0. It's one of the more robust ones. SOPI, or the ITC Sense of Presence Inventory, was created by the UK Television Council, and it was the first to measure TV media. So they went outside of kind of the traditional senses of presence and moved into what we would consider at the time traditional media. So TV rather than just reading a book or listening to music or something like that. IPQ is the iGroup Presence Questionnaire. This one actually has a patent on it, but as far as I know, it's still open public usage. And then the one that I really want to point out for you, one that my research is partially based in part on, TPI, which is the Temple Presence Inventory. And here you see Matthew Lombard, and I believe her name is Susan Ditton. This is Professor Ditton and Lombard from Temple University. And this is by far the most robust and probably considered the one that most presence researchers use. And they actually break their presence research into 5 different subcategories related to social presence, which is you and how social and experience feels from your point of view inside of AR, VR, or even real reality. Then you have social presence as an actor, either passive or active. That's engaging somebody, which I will tell you right now, in the first generation of VR, you're not going to experience it very much unless you're speaking to WorldViz. They have some terrific social presence applications. And there's other subscales there as well: active social presence, engagement, social richness, social realism, and perceptual realism. So my research goal for my dissertation, and this is going to be the, thank you, the 150-point Scrabble winner. What are the components of a comprehensive neuropsychophysiological instrument measuring personal presence, which will provide an objective means of appraising mediated experiences? It's a mouthful. But really what I'm trying to get at is, rather than just doing a questionnaire or just doing the physiological or just doing the neurological, is there a way that you can create a framework for personal presence and come up with a scale that will allow people to understand what their personal presence level is for engagement? And then you can use it like a rating system like you would on video games or movies, so when people go to get content, it's been measured and they know if they're between a 5 and a 6 on the scale, they want to kind of stay in that sweet spot of 5 to 6. Because if you're below that, you'll engage with it just fine, but if you're over that number, likely presence is going to fall away from you. And when that happens, the narrative and the engagement level and the immersion level falls away as well. And that's something I think is very important for the future, especially as technology and content are kind of playing a cat and mouse game as we advance forward. But people's personal presence is very subjective. What one person thinks is great and stable for them might not work for somebody else. And that's going to change as we're racing forward with better and better technology and content. So I believe the demand for immersive experiences and content will advance fast enough to meet consumer demand only if we have a tool capable of providing that kind of guidance and development. So final takeaways, 5 quick things for you. KISS, keep it simple. If you're creating content, don't overdo it. This first generation is all about the initial presence reaction. I think the biggest mistake a lot of content developers are doing right now is they're going out of their way to try to come up with interactivity and immersion and lots of movement and stuff like that, and it's actually not good. Now, I'm sure we'll discuss this and as we go into the panel and questions, but I think probably the most powerful thing you can do right now, if you haven't seen some of these demos, sitting on a beach, watching a sunset in Hawaii and not moving is really, really immersive because your brain can attach that, it gets it, doesn't require a lot of cognitive load. It's really good. So think about that when you're doing this. Learn to crawl before you run, same thing. A lot of people are going out making content that they're expecting the user based on years of content development for platforms like Xbox and PlayStation. It doesn't translate into VR. VR is kind of like tossing keys to an infant to drive a car, right? It's a pretty big learning curve for most people when they get in. They have the wow experience, they have to get used to it, and they have to retrain their brain. Passive immersion, interactivity. So passive immersion is greater than interactivity in the first generation, like I was just saying. Measure twice, release once. Please make an effort to measure focus groups, internal, try it yourself, multiple iterations until you're sure it's good. If you don't do this and you release it and somebody gets sick, they're not going to blame it on themselves. They're going to blame it on your brand. And then you're getting negative association with your brand, saying that so-and-so made me throw up in VR. So imagine how damaging that can be for a big brand. And the narrative is king. I'm sure you've all heard this before, but focus on narrative first, then focus on the physiological things that you need to make sure that you account for so you don't make people sick. And violence is not. And the last thing, I'll just give a quick plug. I have no relation to either one of these two, but the Virtual World Society, started by Tom Furness, he describes it as trying to create the Peace Corps in the virtual world. Definitely check it out. I think it's going to be an amazing effort to bring social advocacy and opportunity to people to create learning experiences and help people with disabilities and other stuff in virtual worlds. And then Voices of VR, if you want a terrific resource for podcasts and blog posts about VR and what's happening in the industry, Kent Bai and Voices of VR is amazing. He has, every week there's a new podcast, so I definitely ask you to check it out. Thank you so much.
I'm going to cover for you, Jimmy, while you switch over. One of the things that Matt's doing and several other people are doing is to not only inform the consumer, and if Matt's successful in this index that he's putting together, I think it's going to be extraordinarily valuable, but also to provide research tools that help inform the creator. And so we think that if we can appropriately use media neuroscience tools, everything from eye tracking to facial recognition to skin response and several others that are currently coming out of the lab, we ought to be able to inform design while it's being pre-produced or at least in the early stages of production, rather than the traditional take a risk, throw it against the wall, and research it after the fact. So that's kind of our goal, is to try and figure out how we can be helpful to both ends of the consumption chain here, the producer and the consumer. Did I cover long enough, Jimmy? Yeah. So let me bring Jamie Gilberti from WorldBiz is going to bring some reality to this presence and show us pieces of what they're up to.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm Jimmy Gilberti. I'm sales and biz dev for WorldBiz, but I actually come from a very deep technical background. So with VR, the combination of 3D, movies, mobile, and I played in all of that, having been on the original IBM PC team in Boca way back, and running 3D Studio Max development at Autodesk for its first 4 versions in the early days when we tried doing VR once before. It's really nice to be able to see it really catching hold now. The company I'm with has been doing VR from an enterprise point of view for, 13 years. And so it's interesting to hear the video or the people talking about VR will do this someday, and we can look at ourselves and say, no, we're kind of doing that now. A lot of that tends to be, we see a lot of things happening with gaming, and so people talking about games and VR. And that's very new, and the tools are easy to go and do that. What I want to show you today are, when we're talking about presence, it really also kind of talks about how you can feel like you're in the space. As Matt was saying, there's a level that you can say, I'm immersed, or I'm actually present. Part of that changes with the way you're interacting with the device. A cardboard with your iPhone or your Samsung, you can look around and there's a immersed. It's a kind of a little bit of a viewfinder or Viewmaster experience from when we were kids. As you start getting into some of the newer consumer technology, you start seeing things like Oculus, also something where you're moving your head, you can get to see some things, and also the new Vive. What we've been doing has been what we call walking VR. So this is something where you're being tracked. So as you moved your head in like an Oculus or a cardboard, it knows what you're doing, and it's moving the space at the same time. So it's natural, it feels like you're there. What we've been able to do is actually, just as the Vive is now doing with the lighthouses, is track where you are in space. So the ability, and I don't have a way to, I can. No, I won't. Okay, I'm a walker. You can walk around the space and look under and above and around things, which is what you see over on the left side here. This is someone who's wearing an HMD. They're in the space, and we're watching them as they're going and doing their thing. What's interesting about that is that's a pretty solitary experience. It's a beautiful space in there. It could be that island or just sitting on the beach, but you're there by yourself. On the right, we've used projection systems, and you know about caves and things along those lines, but it's very, very big in our architectural community for doing collaborative and also being able to share that experience with someone else. Now that in itself has its own set of presence. What's interesting is when you're in an HMD, depending on what you're working with, you don't necessarily see your hands. You see what's around there, and you might have an ability to see a wand, but you're not necessarily there depending on how the experience has been created, whether you have an avatar, do you see your feet, do you see your hands, etc. In the case of the right example, you see the other people in the room, you see yourself, and you're experiencing this, this visual image. And so here's an example of, just let me see if I can walk through this. Again, people in here you have the HMD, and other people, in the case of the projection systems, one person's driving. One person is the one that you're tracking through the system, the other people are kind of experiencing it at the same time. That's interesting if you're doing guided tours, if you're doing real estate type things. If somebody who's never done this experience before, this could be their first experience of getting into the 3D side of things and really getting in. Again, real estate architecture, very, very big for that. Here's an example of a 4-wall cavern. So you have one, or just all around you, and then also on the floor. And here's an example. Now this is one person experiencing. In fact, I did have volume. I didn't think about that. But he's looking at a jet engine and being able to go and walk around it, and almost he goes, and you may have missed it with the light in this room, but wants to get his hands around it. He feels that close enough to it that he can go and look at that. There's people that are using it for urban studies, so being able to say, what is it going to be like on the 405 today? But this is where it gets really interesting when it comes to presence, and where we're moving to something that I'm going to call co-presence. So the presence side of things is being able to go and not only just walk, but walk not thinking you have a limit between the physical difference between what's in the room and the virtual limit of what you have in front of you. How many people here were at the Digital Hollywood last November? Did anybody go and do the demonstration that we have with walking the plank or the pit? So some people did do that. So that's something, and that's where I would say that's presence. And the technology that we've got originally came out of neuroscience, and that was used to deal with people with height phobias. And it's interesting when you see the people who rate that on their own. You'll have people that will come up to a platform. For the people who haven't seen that, let me go to a quick shot of that. So it's the second picture over on the left, where we basically drop the floor and you're on a plank. And now we ask you to go and walk that plank. And you're 100 feet in the air according to what you see. And there's some people that will say, I'm not, nope, fine, got it. Conceptually, I have what you're telling me to do, I'm not going to do that. You have some people that will walk it, and then what we do is we ask them, now step off that plank. And that's where it gets really interesting, because you'll see some people that, nope. You get some people that will just kind of go. So they bridge that gap between what they see in here, that immersiveness, that perceived being in there, to say, if I do that, will I be safe? And you check back and you go, nope, real world, so you kind of bridged it. And then you have people who are really trusting, and they have started getting into this is VR, and maybe we would get into storytelling or things along those lines. What can I do in VR? There are some people that are totally, and they go, And I've actually had to catch someone who basically did a swan dive off of it because they don't know what's going to happen, right? We are setting that world. We're putting that in place. And so here's an example, and I had mentioned it earlier. This is when you get not the solitary experience of being in an HMD, but having you and someone else or multiple people in that same virtual space at the same time. So this is something now you're the two people in that whole world. It's just you two. And that experience is something that is really kind of interesting. In this case, this is being used for training. So the person on the left side, I'm going to kind of just pause this for a sec. Is it moving? Yeah. So this is not a 3D cave at this point. This is something where the middle screen is being used as the God's eye view or bird's eye view of looking down in the virtual set. So we have a helicopter rotor and we have these two people in there. Each one of them sees the head and hand of the other person, because in essence that's all we're tracking right now with the HMD on and with a wand. But when they interact with each other, they hear each other and they see the actions, they see the movement, and that person becomes that other person. So you have a master and apprentice or journeyman, and he's training this person up on what could be $1 million part and wants to be able to show this is how you maintain this part, and you don't have to worry about that person breaking it in that early stages of learning. And what's interesting about this, went the wrong way, is that as you do this, the brain is taking it as an experience and there's muscle memory being acquired at this point. This is training. So the person, you can see the person on the left, this is what that person's view is. And you can see a hand over on the side. And you see there are the two heads over there, and that's the other person's view. And he's basically training the other one up as to on how to do this. So you can see this from an application point of view. If I was training someone to have to do something that was in a hazardous environment, nuclear sites, or in a submarine, turning valves that should only be turned when emergencies, et cetera, you can go through that exercise. Stanford has been using our equipment for a long time, Jeremy Bailenson. And so the kinds of studies they're doing are social studies, 2 people, 3 people interacting with each other. What happens to the mind when you're in VR? If I simulate an earthquake, underneath the floor in this room, there are a huge amount of subwoofers that will shake when that happens. And they're measuring what's going on, and this goes back to measurement again. All of this stuff is able to be measured later inside what your head is doing. There's eye tracking that's also available now, so you can, if you're doing studies, to go and see. As an example, let me go to this wide area picture again. So this is a gymnasium-sized room that someone could then walk around in. And in this case, it's tethered, but it's tethered to a laptop on the person's back. So they can move around. And what this person is doing is they're going through a shopping exercise. They're walking back and forth along basically a Publix or any type of grocery store. And the studies that are going on here are, when I go through that space, what do I retain? What do I remember that's a memory, and what is actually spatial recognition? Because what they'll do is they'll have you go through some exercises, and then they'll change it slightly, and then measure what your body wants to go and do. And so some very interesting things there. So I'm going to summarize now with some of the projects that people are doing with this. There's a lot of phobias. We talked about phobias. Social interaction. So the example of someone who is dealing with abuse, PTSD, things along those lines. Again, putting them back in those situations to be able to either to break that shell that they've put around them to protect them, to be able to ease them out of that shell back into a safe place. And that's World Viz. Thanks.
Thanks, Jimmy. Well, I cover for Barry setting up here. Full disclosure, when I visited World Viz, I did not step off the plank. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, that's kind of chicken, but also kind of safe. I feel really good about my decision. When they dropped that floor 100 feet along me, I just went, oh shit. So, at any rate, thanks, Jimmy. Barry's got a really fascinating point of view, and I mentioned this morning. I guess now that everybody's dropped out of the primary, California won't be bombarded by commercials. But let me point you to a political commercial. It's a 4-minute long political commercial, aired during when Goldwater was running for president, called Confessions of a Republican. 4 minutes, black and white, one actor, lockdown camera, face to face. Probably, I do a bit of consulting in this area, probably the best political storytelling I've ever seen. And it was storytelling. So when you get a chance, Google it, Confessions of a Republican from 1960, whatever it was. So, Barry?
Can everybody hear me? Got a very soft voice. This is a presentation I typically give to investors who are interested in learning about virtual reality and where it's all going. But I also give it to at VR and AR conferences. And it's kind of a different type of presentation that you normally hear because it's most of the people who do give presentations at the conferences have already been drinking the Kool-Aid, and I haven't. So I want to give you kind of a different perspective. And really, it's about how changes in technology affect storytelling. And this comes from the perspective of somebody who's been in the industry, in the innovative trenches of Hollywood for 30 years. I've had a lot of experience. My first experience was I invented the process of colorizing black and white movies. I spent a good amount of time destroying our American film heritage that way. And the thing is, though, that it was very effective, and it was very, the quality of the colorization dramatically improved, and you really couldn't tell whether it was colorized or not. I mean, and some of the most iconic films in our American film heritage were actually produced by me in color, because once you colorize a black and white movie, you get a copyright for 95 years if it's in public domain. Even did some television shows, like this for Not Working, but you don't have to hear this anyway. With Desi Arnaz, did a lot of shows, did about 250, almost 300 films over the years. But colorization was successful, and it's a big cult following. It wasn't accepted by everybody. Some people thought it got in the way. Aside from the creative thing, and please don't bring that up, we'll talk about it another time, the whole creative controversy is a whole nother seminar, which I'd love to give sometime. It took away from the emotional impact of the story. It didn't matter. It was basically a 24-frame flip book. It's a black and white flip book. 24 frames is just above our flicker fusion frequency. So we don't see the flicker, in the frames, but it's not so far away that we don't notice it. It's something other than reality. And it turns out that's really what people had cared about. That was about it. They didn't care if it was color or black and white. And that was a real education for me. Coming from neuroscience, I mean, my doctorate's in neuroscience. I knew nothing about film when I first got here. And this was a real education of what the audience really was looking for. And what they were looking for is a story, period. End of sentence, story. A passive story. So fast forward to 2007, the emergence of 3D digital cinema. 2007, I decided this is going to be where I want to go because I knew that Avatar was coming out, and I wanted to invent a process for converting movies from 2D to 3D, and I did. And 2018, the entire world changed, of course, because Avatar came out, and all of a sudden, everybody was saying, forget about everything you've ever heard about movie making. 3D is now the future of storytelling. And what happened was, well, I mean, of course, my first movie was Alice in Wonderland, and that started the whole thing. That came right after Avatar. And my company, that I'm no longer with Legend 3D, I left it a while ago, but I'm still a cheerleader. We did some of the top movies that have come out over the past 6 years, probably about 30, 35 of them. I won't go through all of these. But I don't have enough time. But anyway, around 2010, of course, Jim Cameron proclaimed that the entire world will now be in 3D. So all of the movies that are going to be coming out will be in 3D. And Ridley Scott and all the other directors, you know, they did some great job with 3D, especially Martin Scorsese, my favorite. Hugo was incredible, you know. But this spurred a whole change in the way theatrical movies are presented. Digital was accelerated. The conversion from film to digital was accelerated, and 3D followed that conversion. If you look at right here, 2007, that's when I started. So, you know, I kind of took a risk because, you know, there weren't that many movie theaters around that could actually show any of the stuff I was planning to do. But just to show you real quick how it's done, the walk. Anybody see the walk? See it in 3D? Good. And you saw all of it. If you didn't, you would have only seen 20% of it. Anyway, what we do is we segment it out like this, and we don't create wireframes or anything like that. We segment it out, and then within our software we mold that into with volume. And I'm going to go real fast on this. So this is a simulation of our user interface, and what happens is we extrude everything out. Now we extrude everything out, but everything is placed by an artist. This is not automated at all. And not only that, but they're also not they're not flat. And this white box that represents the movie screen. So everything that's outside that screen, like for instance the balance pole, is in your lap, and everything inside is elsewhere. But again, this is all creatively done, and you can't do that when you're shooting with cameras. So in a 2D movie there's no disparity. Your brain is telling you that the thing that's coming out at you is actually over there on the screen. With 3D, it opens up the entire theater so that it invades your personal space, and it's all the way into infinity inside the screen. So it gets rid of the fourth wall, and basically the entire theater becomes the movie. So, and you can be very creative about it. Anybody see the Poltergeist? One, great. Anyway, binocular disparity can be used very creatively. For instance, here's one shot where the Weeping Willow is part of it has a character, it's part of the movie, and it actually attacks a little boy. So we brought that into the audience, we actually brought it into the audience, and we moved everything real far, we made it very, very deep, and we made the people look very insignificant and vulnerable. Here, this doll, very, very scary. We converged behind the doll, brought the doll into your lap, so you're scared as well. This doll is rolling towards the closet where the poltergeists are, and it's rolling very slowly. We've moved the closet far, far away, and we also slanted down the floor so that the doll is actually moving against gravity, so it makes it even freakier. You can't do that in 2D, obviously, and you certainly can't do it with cameras. In this case, we just wanted to make the places the poltergeists live as far deep as possible into infinity. And here's a very interesting one. We converged right on the hand of the mom, so that the mom was in the audience with us. The mom and us represented safety. She was elongated towards the closet, so it really gave a very, very effective sense of what was going on. Now, not all 3D conversion is subliminal. There's many that's really out there, and it actually evokes primitive autonomic responses in us. I don't know how many people saw Final Destination. Good. No. Oh, there's one. It's very, very simple. I'm going to go real quick. At a Formula One a racetrack, the Formula One cars crash and go into the stands. A whole bunch of people die. Everybody goes outside. And if you're squeamish, please don't look at this for the next few minutes.
Have you all lost your fucking mind?
So let's look at what happened right there. Okay, that was 2D, all right? It looked pretty, you know, some people said, oh. But if this thing were in 3D, if you were in a 3D theater, these two people would be in the row in front of you. okay? They placed in the road in front of you. So basically, when that tire hits an asymptote, starts going down, it goes in a different direction. It's not coming directly at you, but then it starts coming directly at you, and the disparity gets wider and wider and wider. And disparity is the best indication of direction, distance, and velocity. And it's based in a very primitive part of our brain, in a very primitive part of our visual system called the magnocellular visual system. And it's heavily myelinated, very fast. And what it does is it gives us a subliminal or a subconscious idea that something is coming at us. All right, and it's low spatial frequency, it's high contrast, and it's monochrome. No need, it's not necessary to have anything like that when you're trying to get out of the way. And we've all experienced it. You know, something move out of the way, we didn't even know there's something was coming at us. Well, it's the same sort of thing. And Final Destination uses that very, very well. Then there's a parvocellular pathway that brings all the other information, all the detailed information. But the magnocellular part goes to the tectum and into the amygdala. The amygdala is our fight and flight, and very few synapses to it. So that's really where it works. So, I mean, who wouldn't want to watch movies in 3D when you can get that immersed? This is real immersion. And you're not only that, but it's a whole social experience too. You're there with other people. Of course, you've got these stupid glasses on separating you from them, but nevertheless, you're in a theater and this is fully immersive. But the problem is, not everybody liked 3D. For some people didn't like wearing the glasses, some people got sick of 3D movies, some don't like to pay the upcharge, some don't like the intrusion into their personal space. I'm just amazed that people, you know, I asked them if they saw Gravity or The Walk in 3D, and they say, no, I didn't. I said, well, why do you even buy a ticket? I mean, seriously, if you're going to see it in 2D. And I mean, they were made for 3D. And as in colorization, some people don't like to be immersed in a story. They want to be told a story. So today, there are less movies being produced in 3D. The big blockbusters are. 3D is featured only in high-end TVs. The TV industry didn't really take off. But nevertheless, 3D exhibition is very, very successful. The top movies are always 3D, and internationally, theatrically, it's very successful. But during 2010, Hollywood, the consumer electronics industry, and smart money from Silicon Valley behave the way they normally do. And they get very excited via hype. I think many people have seen the hype curve here. Trigger technology, plateau of immature technology, the peak of inflated expectations. That was 2010. And if you went to CES 2010, 2011, all you'd see is 3D. Everybody had a 3D monitor. Some are curved. They had auto stereo, which absolutely was ridiculous. But the entire place was taken over by 3D. And in 2011, it was still 3D, but then it was 4K 3D, so it was going to be even better. But right now, we're pretty much in a plateau of productivity. I think we've gone through the entire cycle, and 3D obviously is not in the home unless you buy a high-end TV. But what was happening is what is typical here in Hollywood, in the electronics industry, and quote-unquote smart money in Silicon Valley. There's a lemmings phenomenon. It's a great metaphor for what goes on. People just follow the leader, and especially with manufacturers who don't want to be left out. By the way, that's me. I didn't go over the cliff, and I'm still there with 3D. I still believe in 3D. Fast forward to 2015, and we've got augmented reality and virtual reality. Of course, everybody knows augmented reality is bringing CG into our reality, and virtual reality is taking us into another reality. The full broad spectrum of VR applications are many. There's so many of them. There's too many to mention, but scripted entertainment, storytelling, nonlinear, and linear performing arts, that right there is the target. That's the sweet spot. That's what CES wants. And unfortunately, there's problems with that. And now, all right, so we've got, when 3D came out, we had two choices, active or passive glasses. Right now we got about 35 different headsets for virtual reality. You think that's going to confuse people? No, it's not going to confuse people because They got cardboard. Anybody who really, you know, if they can wait until the technology evolves and there's a better form factor or whatever. Certainly, if my kids ever ask me for a Vive, I would say you just use cardboard, you know, for now, and we'll see where it goes. As far as augmented reality is concerned, the optics are not mature yet, but they don't have to be. In terms of augmented reality, if you have an iOS or an Android mobile device, you can experience augmented reality today. So this is all exciting stuff, and the camera manufacturers, of course, are lining up. This is just a few examples. There's so many different 360 cameras, and people are talking in Hollywood about how all movies are going to be shot this way, and not only that, but display devices are going to disappear. We're just going to have these things on our head all the time. So, virtual reality. Now what we're coming to now is, forget everything you've ever thought about filmmaking. Virtual reality is the new future of storytelling. And believe it or not, within this bubble, this Hollywood bubble, there's so many people who actually believe that. It's scary. With VR, you might be a ghost observer in a story, you might be a participant in the story, you might be an actor, you might be this story. And Hollywood is only now trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And they're finding out, for the most part, traditional narrative storytelling doesn't work. An example of virtual reality experience, I mean, there are a lot of virtual reality experiences, but for the most part, they're theme park rides. There's one hit by a train where this guy...
Hello, Woodley. Today we are playing Insurgent. And
Don't worry. He gets hit by a train.
it's not gonna hurt.
Right.
Ah!
It's fine. All right. So, and that's pretty typical. And then you've got the Void, which is very similar to what Jimmy was showing, where you've got motion trackers and 3D sensors are all over the place, and Vive has the same thing, where you can actually experience, you can walk around, and everything is mapped onto walls, and you can experience it. I'm not going to get into that, not enough time. So the question is, will the audience accept it? I'm not very optimistic about it, and remember, all I'm talking about is storytelling and performing arts. Can it attract a broad enough audience? Can it make money? I come from academia, and frankly, if it can't make money, it's an academic exercise. And I'm finished with esoteric exercises. It has to make money, or it's never going to survive. There's no doubt that VR has a bright future in cinematics and with gaming and cinematics associated with gaming, but there are many who doubt that VR is appropriate for storytelling as we know it today. I'm not going to say never, but what we know of today as storytelling is not here, and it's doubtful that most people will accept what is going to be, what is going to come. And some of the people that join me in this feeling are Ed Catmull, the co-founder of Pixar, Jim Cameron, George Lucas, Robert Redford. And in fact, at Sundance this year, there were 30 quote-unquote films, VR films there. And during a Q&A session, they asked George Lucas and Robert Redford, what did you think of the VR films? And Redford said, well, it had all the elements of film. It had actors, it had scripts, it had visual effects, but there was no story. And it's true, it's no story. They were experiences. They were theme park rides. They were that sort of thing, but it was not story. And depending on what you read in terms of stats, some people are saying that VR is not really going to be as successful as projected. And there's agencies that have done market research that find that the average people outside of this little bubble that we live are virtually uninterested in VR. So here we are again, Hollywood, consumer electronics industry, and smart money from Silicon Valley for CES. Same old thing, except now I think that we're sort of rounding the peak of inflated expectations in terms of virtual reality. But it's still a lemmings thing. When Zuckerberg put $2 billion into Oculus Rift, everybody started following him over that cliff, and they're still following. For virtual reality, I think the moment of truth would be 2017. If the content isn't there, it's going to find its own place, but it's not going to be in storytelling. For augmented reality, I believe the future of storytelling is only beginning. Very exciting. HoloLens has some amazing demonstrations. Demonstrations are always good because they're always They're wonderful, but reality is a little bit different. They've got a lot of problems with the field of view, but nevertheless, you're out there in your own reality experiencing some,
Use that now.
experiencing stuff
For
in
larger
your reality,
enemies with
in
more
your living
powerful
room.
weapons,
And it's very
Dan can
exciting.
even use his shield to defend himself.
But again, this is a game. And then you've got Magic Leap, $1.4 billion to create some optics. And frankly, they haven't produced anything yet other than this wonderful, wonderful demo that was created actually by Weta. It's not, it has nothing to do with anything that they've produced. $1.4 billion, and they had better come out with something better than HoloLens than this, and also something that's affordable. We've yet to see. The problem with Magic Leap is that if they fail big, because $1.4 billion is an insane amount of money to create what they need to, what they're trying to do. It's absolutely, they should be arrested for it. So the thing is that if they fail, it's going to be bad for the entire industry. Oh, but we've had virtual reality. Okay? We've had virtual reality for a long time. Anybody see Tupac and Michael Jackson on stage as a real hologram? Well, neither did anybody else, because it wasn't a real hologram. It was basically nothing more than a parlor trick that's from 1862 called Pepper's Ghost by a man named Pepper. And actually, it went beyond that. It's several hundred years old, using reflection. It's a projector that goes down onto a reflecting surface and up onto a clear Mylar sheet. And you've got Snoop Dogg behind, making believe he's singing with Tupac. It's all smoke and mirrors. But nevertheless, that's augmented reality. But it doesn't have to be a flat reflection.
You have to keep inventing it.
So I just want to show you this one. So this is 3D, using 3D sensing, you can actually create.
Transitions to 3D.
Here, let me just go on. You can actually create augmented reality that you can fit on your hand. If you can do that, you can have a Dustin Bieber or Tom Petty doing a performance on your kitchen table with everybody around wearing optics and getting their own perspective on what they're doing. This is something that was done 4 years ago. This is all flat. Okay, this is a Kit Kat commercial. I want to see these people as real CG, real people. There's also some location-based AR stories. HoloLens is, I think, going in the right direction, and we can actually have Pandora right here eventually, and we can all walk around it, and we won't be avatars, we'll be together. So basically, in closing, I believe in VR, and I think there's a place for VR. Storytelling is not one of those places. Augmented reality, I believe, is going to be the future. Virtual reality is really the precursor to augmented reality, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. I know from personal experience, if you're a producer or if you're a designer or developer, there's a minor risk to being late to a market. There's a massive risk to being early. And so I can, if you want to see my bank statements from the old days of multimedia, I can actually prove that statement. Questions, comments for anybody on the panel? Yes.
You know, what I'm wondering most about, this is just for anybody on the panel here, is what are the connections that we're exploring right now between the sense of presence, you know, and some of the biological measures that we have? You know, I know everybody can measure heartbeat, but what are we looking past that?
You mean beyond the physiological, how are we measuring presence? Is that what you're asking?
How are we measuring presence in the physiological?
Jimmy?
There's a study that's starting to happen now at Northeastern University where you had mentioned earlier about measurement with brainwaves, and it's hard with an HMD to go and do that, but with TMS, he's measuring what the brain is producing while someone is grasping at an object and correlating that data to go and see and do that correlation. So those studies are happening today.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. So from Nielsen's perspective, it's something that we're actively investigating. And I think there's other companies out there as well that are going beyond just the standard physiological measurements and trying to look at things like EEG and other measures that can get more directly at spatial recognition and that sort of thing.
One of my, I love all the opportunity of VR, AR. One of my concerns is from a storytelling perspective, we're used to that 2D or being outside of the box. Once we're in the box, it's really disheartening feeling to be like, these people aren't paying attention to you. As a director, it's hard to get your actors to hit the spots. How are you gonna get those other people? Have you seen any examples of people that are attacking that problem or that challenge in storytelling?
Barry?
You mean director? I mean, how to direct? Is that what you're talking about?
How to make a VR storytelling experience where the people can feel that they're actually part of it, or are we only going to see passive in storytelling VR? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, I can be in the room, and there could be Joe and Bob talking over there.
Yeah.
They have no idea that I'm there.
Oh, I see.
So
Well,
that's-
yeah, I think The Martian, there was a demo of The Martian where you could actually go around and find stuff and build a greenhouse, so you could actually be part of it. But I know what you're saying. No,
That's
that,
experience as opposed to.
you're talking about an AI type experience. I don't know if that's,
It's kind of the definition of presence, isn't it, Jimmy, from your labs in terms of putting people in the context of other people's action?
I think that would probably still be experience as you define it, though. I think you're saying, how do I create a narrative that can put someone in it?
The only example that I've ever, and I haven't experienced it, but they said there was people around a dining room table, and each person had a persona. So I could be the mother of the family, but you still didn't have, like, it was already pre-set. There was nothing that I could do to change.
Well, I'd like to ask Barry, if as you're looking through this, how much does stage production writing happen when it comes to VR now? In other words, you're not just doing, here's my edit, I want this view, this view, this view. Everything is now choreographed if you're creating a...
right. Well, and Lee was asked about virtual reality just recently, and he said, he's showing his movie at 4K and 120 frames per second. He said, my reality is better than your reality. Let me move the camera. And I think that's pretty much the feelings of most directors. It's incredibly difficult to control the audience. And unless there's a real reason for having 360 VR for storytelling, why have it?
Yeah, I would second that. In fact, the one that you're talking about, I mentioned Kent Bai's podcast. He actually just interviewed that guy at GDC. I think it's episode 358. It's one of the most recent ones. And I would second what Barry's saying. I think there's a place for narrative, but maybe not in VR. And I think the reason for it, if you think about it neurologically, is linear storytelling is told in such a way that it's easy to follow, right? In VR, the problem of being able to look wherever you want brings in the abstract. And when you're talking about machine learning or artificial intelligence, the knock on it is, how do you teach a computer, let alone a human inside of an experience, to follow something in a semi-linear fashion, right? Because there's so many variability to what somebody can do reaction-wise. And there's only so many cues you can give, even from like the world of theater. There's only so many audio cues or visual cues or flashing of a light or whatever to direct some people's attention. That doesn't mean that they're going to stay there. In fact, it's a lot of psychology studies and neurological studies have shown that people tend to have an anchor gaze where they'll look at something, but then just like a bird to a shiny object, they want to look around, especially in an environment that they're not familiar with, right? So I think with the type of narrative you're talking about, we're probably at least a generation, if not more, away from having the technology to support something like that, assuming that there can be machine learning or artificial intelligence to support it as well. So you need things like, for social presence, you really need eye tracking, so you can track eye gaze. One of the biggest things is eye line, right? And that's the biggest complaint that I've heard about VR narrative, is if there's no eye line, it's really creepy. It's almost voyeuristic, because all you have to do is move a couple degrees off axis and you're no longer looking at the actor and they're staring off into the distance. And now it feels like you're some ghost in the room. So if there's a place for narrative, we're not going to be there in the first generation.
One more.
Yeah, I wanted to hear your thoughts about, I think that based on all the examples you showed about virtual reality, we're trying to appeal to negative emotions like fear and disgust, and trying to attract a mostly young male audience. And I wonder if designers change the narrative and show more positive emotions like joy or maybe a little bit of sadness, and try to attract a female audience or see it from a female's perspective. I mean, one of the most popular shows of the BBC now is called The Midwife, and it's all about joy and bonding and friendship, and just people love it. And when I see those movies, it's all about zombies and trains crashing and being disgusted and scared. And maybe if virtual reality appealed to more positive emotions, people would be more accepting of it.
I think that if I could take a piece of this one, storytelling, technology, and narrative is all about triggering emotion one way or another. When it fails, we don't trigger any of it. When it succeeds on the cheap, we trigger the easiest emotions, which is fear, repulsion, those sorts of things. When we put tools in the hands of kids in the middle schools, they don't tend to make Call of Duty 2. They tend to try to design programs that have meaning to them, in many cases that fall into what you're talking about. But ultimately, when's the last time you saw in any media, right, the types of stories that really trigger the kinds of pro-social motivations you're talking about? It's extraordinarily difficult to do. And just because we have new technology doesn't make it easier.
There's a saying that that I always like to say, and that is that the high road is not flat, but it's a much better view. It's very easy to roll into the gutter and get yourself dirty, and tell a dirty joke. It's much harder to be funny and clean, and it's harder the high road is not flat.
I wish we had more time this morning. Thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking Cynthia Lieberman, Barry Sanders, Jimmy Goldberg, and Matt Crock.